4 years. James Mitchell had carried the letter in his coat pocket for 4 years, through Colorado snowstorms and Montana dust storms, through every mile between the grave where his best friend lay buried, and the woman standing alone by that fence post, the woman who'd been waiting 5 years for a man who would never come home. Tomorrow, James told himself, tomorrow he would destroy her last hope, but tomorrow everything would change. The sun was dying over the Wyoming territory when James Mitchell first saw her. He sat high in the saddle, his horse restless beneath him, while the woman stood alone by a weathered fence post at the edge of clear water. The distance between them could have been 50 yards or 500. It felt like an ocean. 4 years. James had carried the letter in his coat pocket for 4 years, through Colorado snowstorms and Montana dust storms, through nights when he drank too much and mornings when he could barely stand, through every mile between the grave where his best friend lay buried and this moment watching the woman William Carter had loved stand vigil for a man who would never come home. James's hand moved to his chest, feeling the crinkle of paper through the fabric. The envelope was worn soft as deerskin. Now the ink faded at the edges where his fingers had traced Will's handwriting 1,000 times. To Emma Hayes, should she ever be found. Give her this. Tell her I'm sorry. The woman turned slightly profile sharp against the amber light. Even from a distance, James could see the straightness of her spine, the way she held her head high despite whatever weight pressed on her shoulders. Will had called her delicate, a Boston lady refined and fragile as porcelain. Will had been wrong. James watched her scan the horizon, searching, always searching. His chest tightened. Tell her. That's all you have to do. Ride down there, hand her the letter, speak the words. Your fiancé is dead. I'm sorry. I tried to save him. I failed. Simple, brutal, true. But James's horse stood still, and his hand fell away from the letter, and the sun continued its descent while the woman kept her lonely watch. Not today. Maybe tomorrow. Not today. He turned his horse toward the valley where the Rocking D cattle drive had made camp. Behind him, the woman remained at her post, waiting, still waiting. Tomorrow, James told himself. Tomorrow he would tell her the truth. Tomorrow he would destroy her last hope. Tomorrow he would finally keep his promise to a dead man. But not today. The Rocking D camp sprawled across the grassland like a small village. 2,000 head of cattle grazed under the watchful eyes of 15 cowboys, their fires dotting the twilight like fallen stars. James rode past the remuda where the spare horses milled, past the chuck wagon where the scent of beans and coffee hung thick in the air, past clusters of men cleaning gear and mending tack. They nodded as he passed. Mitchell, boss. Some called him that, though Hank Sterling was the official trail boss. James was the scout, the advance man, the one who rode ahead to check water sources and negotiate with ranchers and handle the problems before they became catastrophes. 4 months on the trail from Texas to Montana, and they were finally in Wyoming. Another week, maybe 2, and they would reach the northern territories where buyers waited. Then the men would collect their pay. Some would drift. Some would sign on for the return journey. James had done this dance for 8 years now. Same routine. Different cattle. Different faces in the crew mostly, though a few constants remained. Old Jake Williams sat by the main fire, his weathered face catching the light as he poked at the flames with a stick. 60 if he was a day, Jake had forgotten more about cattle and horses and this hard country than most men would ever learn. He looked up as James dismounted. "You see her?" Jake's voice carried the rasp of too many years breathing dust. James didn't need to ask who. He began unsaddling, his horse movements automatic. "Yeah." "You tell her." "No." "James." "I know." James lifted the saddle, his arms straining under the weight. Not from the leather and wood, from the conversation, from the letter that never got lighter, no matter how long he carried it. "Tomorrow." "You said that yesterday." Jake spat into the fire. "And the day before. And the week before that when we first crossed into Wyoming and you figured out she was here." James set the saddle on its stand with more force than necessary. His horse side stepped, ears flicking. "You think I don't know that?" "I think you're afraid." Of course I'm afraid." The admission came out raw. James turned to face the old man. "How do I look that woman in the eye and tell her the man she's been waiting for is dead, that she wasted 5 years of her life on a ghost?" Jake's expression softened. "You tell her the truth, that Will loved her until his last breath, that he died thinking of her, that you came all this way to honor his final wish." He paused. "And you tell her you're sorry." "Sorry doesn't fix anything." "No, but it's a start." A commotion near the chuck wagon interrupted them. A child's voice, high and frightened. James's jaw tightened as he recognized the sound. Henry. The boy was 8 years old and small for his age, all bones and big eyes, and a solemnity that belonged to someone 3 times older. His mother had been the drive's cook, a widow woman named Sarah, who could make beans taste like a feast and had a laugh that could brighten the dreariest day on the trail. Then fever took her near Laramie, quick and cruel as a lightning strike. 1 week she was fine. The next she was burning up. 3 days later they buried her in the prairie with nothing but a wooden cross to mark the spot. Henry had stood at the grave without crying. That worried James more than tears would have. Now the boy stood near the wagon, backed against the wheel, while 2 of the younger hands teased him. Not mean-spirited, but thoughtless. Ranch humor that didn't account for a child's grief. "What's wrong, little man? Your mama coming back to cook us supper." "Leave him alone." James's voice cut through the camp noise like a blade. The cowboys turned, saw James's face, found somewhere else to be, very quickly. James approached Henry slowly, the way he might approach a spooked horse. He crouched down, bringing himself to the boy's level. "You all right, partner?" Henry nodded. His eyes were dry but red-rimmed. He hadn't cried yet, not once, since his mother died. James knew that kind of grief, the kind that lodged so deep it turned to stone. "They didn't mean anything by it," James said quietly. "Cowboys say stupid things sometimes, especially the young ones who haven't learned better yet." "I know." Henry's voice was barely a whisper. "I just miss her." "I know you do." "Mr. Sterling says I can't stay with the drive much longer, says it's too dangerous for a kid, says we need to find me a place." Henry looked up, and there was fear in those young eyes now, real fear. "What if nobody wants me? What if I have to go to an orphanage? Mama said those places are bad." James felt something crack in his chest. He thought of Will, of promises made and kept and broken, of a woman standing by a fence post waiting for someone who would never come, of all the ways life could shatter a person and keep right on shattering them. He thought of duty, of debt, of the letter in his pocket that bound him to the dead. "Listen to me," James said, and his voice came out rougher than he intended. "You're not going to any orphanage. You hear me? I'm going to find you a good home, a real home, with people who'll take care of you proper. You promise?" James hesitated. Promises were dangerous things. They had weight. They didn't let go once made. But looking at Henry's face, at the hope struggling against fear, James knew he had only one answer. "I promise." Henry's shoulders relaxed slightly. Not much, but enough. "Thank you, Mr. Mitchell." "James. Just call me James." "Yes, sir. James." Later, after the boy had curled up near the chuck wagon with a blanket and finally fallen into exhausted sleep, Hank Sterling found James checking the night watch rotation. Hank was a big man, 6'3", and built like an oak barrel with a gray-streaked beard and eyes that missed nothing. He'd been running cattle drives for 20 years, and he ran a tight outfit, fair but firm, the kind of boss men would follow into hell if he asked. "You promised the boy a home." It wasn't a question. "Yeah, in Clearwater. Town's got a school, probably got families who'd take in an orphan." Hank studied him in the firelight. "This about the letter you've been carrying, James should have known Hank would figure it out. The man was too observant for secrets to last long." "Partially," James admitted. "And the woman at the fence post, her too." Hank nodded slowly. "We're moving out day after tomorrow. I can give you 3 days in town to settle the boy. Then you catch up with us, or you tell me now you're staying, and I'll find another scout." 3 days. James had tracked men across 3 territories in less time. 3 days should be plenty to place Henry with a family hand. Emma the letter speak the words that would shatter her world. 3 days to finally let Will rest. "I'll catch up," James said. "1 week at most." "See that you do. I need you in Montana." Hank clapped him on the shoulder. "And James, whatever you're carrying, whatever weight you think you've got to bear alone, sometimes the best thing you can do is set it down." If only it were that simple, James thought. But he just nodded, and Hank moved on to check the herd, and James stood alone in the darkness with a letter in his pocket and a promise to a dead man that was 4 years overdue. Morning came cold and clear. James saddled his horse in the pre-dawn darkness, Henry perched behind him. The boy was quiet, watching everything with those 2 serious eyes. They rode toward Clearwater as the sun painted the prairie gold and red. The town materialized out of the grassland like a mirage. 1 main street lined with weathered buildings, a church with a white steeple, a schoolhouse set slightly apart. Maybe 200 people lived here, counting the surrounding ranches. Small, isolated, the kind of place where everyone knew everyone's business and strangers were noticed immediately. James had done his research over the past week. He knew Clearwater had a school teacher, a woman from back east who'd arrived 6 months ago, a woman who spent her afternoons standing by an old fence post at the edge of town watching the horizon, a woman named Emma Hayes. But before James could seek her out, before he could figure out how to approach her and what words to use, and whether he should hand her the letter first or explain first or just say it straight and brutal and be done with it, fate made the decision for him. They were passing the general store when he saw the crowd. 20, maybe 30 townspeople gathered in the street. At the center stood a man James immediately disliked. Mid-40s, well-dressed in clothes too fine for a frontier town. Dark hair slicked back with pomade. Expensive boots that had never seen a hard day's work. He held papers in one hand and gestured with the other, his voice carrying across the morning air. And facing him, spine straight and chin raised, stood Emma Hayes. James had only seen her from a distance yesterday. Up close he could see Will had been wrong about more than her fragility. She wasn't delicate. She was beautiful in a way that had nothing to do with fashion or softness. Sharp cheekbones, gray eyes that held storms, dark hair pulled back severely like she was trying to contain something wild. 23 years old according to Will's letters, but she looked older, harder. Life had left its marks. "Miss Hayes," the well-dressed man's voice dripped false sympathy. "I understand this is difficult for you, but the law is quite clear. No one has proven up this claim in 5 years. Without William Carter physically present, the land reverts to public domain." Mr. Carter staked that claim legally in 1872. Emma's voice was steady, cool as creek water. "I have his documents." "Documents don't mean anything without the man, I'm afraid." The man James now knew must be Silas Blackwood, town council member and apparent land speculator, shook his head sadly. Where is this mysterious William Carter? Why hasn't he appeared to defend his claim? Murmurs rippled through the crowd. That poor girl. 5 years waiting for a man who probably ran off. Or died, most likely died. Shame, really. Emma's jaw tightened, but she didn't flinch. The land is William Carter's. That makes it mine. Yours. Blackwood's eyebrows rose. By what right were you married to this man? The crowd leaned in. We were engaged, Emma said quietly. Engaged. Blackwood made the word sound dirty. Not married. Not even forgive me for being indelicate traveling together as man and wife. You simply arrived in Clearwater 6 months ago, claiming connection to a man no one has seen in years. Claiming rights to land you have no legal standing to hold. I have his letters, his promises. Promises? Blackwood smiled, and it was the kind of smile that made James's hands curl into fists. My dear Miss Hayes, the frontier is littered with broken promises. Men say many things to pretty women. It doesn't make those things true. The crowd murmured again, louder now. James saw the judgment in their eyes, the pity mixed with scorn. This Eastern woman, this spinster clinging to a dead man's memory, this fool who wasted her youth waiting for someone who was never coming back. They didn't say the words aloud. They didn't have to. Emma stood alone in the center of that circle of judgment, and James saw her hands tremble before she clasped them together, knuckles white with pressure. Saw the way she swallowed hard, throat working, saw her fight to maintain the dignity that was the only armor she had left. "The land office will decide," she said finally. "Not you, Mr. Blackwood." "Indeed they will. I'm filing my claim next week. Unless someone can prove William Carter's legal right and your legal connection to him, the land will be mine." Blackwood folded his papers with precise movements. "I suggest you make other arrangements for your future, Miss Hayes. Perhaps return to Boston. I'm sure there are opportunities there more suited to a woman of your situation." He turned to leave, and the crowd began to disperse. Emma stood frozen, her face carved from stone. Only her eyes betrayed her. They were bright with unshed tears she refused to let fall. James found himself moving before he'd made a conscious decision. His boots hit the dirt street. His hand found the brim of his hat. "Ma'am." Emma's head snapped toward him. Up close, her eyes were even more striking, gray like storm clouds and just as turbulent. "Do I know you?" Her voice was steady, but he heard the strain underneath. "No, ma'am. Name's James Mitchell. I'm with the cattle drive camped outside town." He paused, choosing his next words carefully. "I couldn't help but overhear. Sounds like you're having some trouble with that land claim." Her expression shuddered immediately. "That's none of your concern, Mr. Mitchell." "No, ma'am, it's not. But I've got a different kind of trouble you might be able to help with." He glanced back at Henry, who still sat on the horse watching everything with those serious eyes. "Boy there is named Henry. He's 8 years old. Lost his mother 2 weeks ago to fever. The cattle drive can't keep him. Too dangerous. We're looking for a family to take him in. Heard you're the school teacher." Emma's gaze shifted to Henry, and James saw her entire demeanor change. The walls came down, the hardness softened. She moved toward the horse, her movements gentle. "Hello, Henry." The boy looked at her, then at James, uncertain. "It's all right, partner," James said quietly. "Miss Hayes is a teacher. She's going to help us find you a home." Henry slid down from the horse landing with a small thump. He stood very still as Emma knelt before him, bringing herself to his level. James noticed how careful she was, how she didn't crowd the boy, how she waited for him to meet her eyes before she spoke. "I'm very sorry about your mother," Emma said softly. "I lost mine when I was young, too. It's hard, isn't it?" Henry nodded. "Can you read?" "Some. Mama taught me my letters." "That's wonderful. Would you like to learn more? I teach at the school here. We have 11 other children, some your age." For the first time since his mother died, James saw something flicker in Henry's face. Not quite hope, but not quite despair either. "I like learning," Henry said quietly. "Then we'll get along just fine." Emma straightened, looking back at James. "There's a family here, the Daltons. They lost their son 2 years ago to diphtheria. They've been praying for another child. I can speak to Reverend Halloway. He coordinates these matters. The cattle drive leaves day after tomorrow. We need to settle this quick. Then we'll work quickly." Emma's chin came up, determination replacing the earlier vulnerability. "Bring Henry to the schoolhouse this afternoon. I'll have answers by then." "Much obliged, ma'am." James hesitated. He should leave now. Should take Henry and go. Should wait until tomorrow to approach her about Will, about the letter, about the truth that would break her. But watching her, seeing the strength underneath the sadness, seeing the way she'd handled that pompous bastard Blackwood with dignity and tact, James felt something shift in his chest. She deserved better than what life had given her, better than 5 years waiting for a dead man, better than the judgment of small-minded townspeople who whispered behind their hands. She deserved the truth. "Miss Hayes," he found himself saying, "that business with Blackwood, the land claim. If you need someone to stand with you when the time comes, I'm willing." She stared at him, surprise flickering across her features. "Why would you do that? You don't know me." "No, ma'am, but I knew William Carter." The world seemed to stop. Emma's face went white, her lips parted, her hand reached out, gripping the horse's mane for support. "You knew Will?" The words came out barely above a whisper. James's stomach twisted. This was it. The moment. He could tell her now, pull out the letter, speak the truth, get it over with. But Henry was watching, and the street was full of people, and Emma looked like she might shatter if he said one more word. "I did," James said carefully. "In Colorado. We worked together for a time." "Is he—" Emma swallowed hard. "Where is he now?" Every instinct James had screamed at him to answer, to end her suffering, to finally deliver the message he'd carried for 4 years. But looking at her face, at the hope and fear warring in her expression, at the vulnerability she was trying so hard to hide, James found himself saying something different. "It's complicated, ma'am. Can we talk later? Somewhere private, when there aren't so many people around." Emma studied him for a long moment. James felt like she was looking straight through him, seeing every secret he carried, every lie he'd told himself about why he'd waited so long to find her. "All right," she said finally. "Tonight, after I finish with my students. Come to the boarding house, Mrs. Thompson's place. Everyone knows where it is." "Yes, ma'am." She turned to go, then looked back. "Mr. Mitchell, did Will ever mention me in Colorado?" The raw need in that question nearly undid him. "Every day," James said quietly. "You were all he talked about." It wasn't a lie. Will had talked about Emma constantly, about her letters, her laugh, the life they would build together, right up until the moment the mine collapsed and James pulled his broken body from the rubble and listened to him die. Emma's eyes filled with tears she still refused to let fall. "Thank you. Thank you for telling me that." She walked away, shoulders straight, despite the weight she carried. James watched her go, his hand moving unconsciously to the letter in his pocket. Tomorrow, he told himself again. Tonight. Whatever came first. He would tell her the truth. He had to. The saloon was called the Dusty Rose, which was optimistic given that the place was neither dusty nor remotely rose-like. It was actually quite clean, James noted as he pushed through the doors that evening. The bar was polished, the floors swept. The handful of patrons scattered at tables looked more like shopkeepers than ranch hands. Clearwater was too small for the kind of rowdy saloon James had grown accustomed to in cattle towns. This was more of a gathering place where men came to escape their wives for an hour and nurse a whiskey while discussing crop prices and weather patterns. James ordered a beer and found a corner table where he could watch the room. Henry was with old Jake back at camp learning to play checkers, and knowing Jake probably picking up a few phrases a child definitely shouldn't know. James had a few hours before he needed to meet Emma at the boarding house. A few hours to figure out what the hell he was going to say to her. The door opened. James looked up out of habit, cataloging the newcomer the way he cataloged everything. Well-dressed, clean-shaven, expensive hat, soft hands that had never seen real work. Mid-30s maybe. The kind of man who smiled too much and too easily. The stranger approached the bar, ordered whiskey, then turned to survey the room. His gaze landed on James, and something flickered in his expression. Recognition. Curiosity. James couldn't quite place it. The man walked over. "Mind if I join you? Place is a bit empty for drinking alone." James shrugged, gesturing to the empty chair. The man sat, extending a hand. "Thomas Carter, pleased to make your acquaintance." James's blood turned to ice. His hand froze halfway to the handshake. He forced himself to complete the motion, gripping the other man's palm. Carter. Will's last name. But Will had been an only child. He'd told James that a dozen times. No brothers, no sisters. Just him and his parents, both long dead. So who the hell was this James Mitchell? He kept his voice neutral. "You new in town?" "Just arrived yesterday, looking into some family business." Thomas Carter's smile was all teeth. "You wouldn't happen to know an Emma Hayes, would you?" I heard she's the school teacher here. Every muscle in James's body tensed. Why are you asking about her? Well, now that's a family matter. Thomas leaned back in his chair, projecting confidence. You see, my brother William staked a land claim here some years back. I've come to collect on his behalf. Lie. The word rang through James's head like a gunshot. This man was lying. Will had no brother, which meant this was some kind of con, some scheme to steal the land Emma was fighting for. Your brother, James said slowly. William Carter. That's right. And where is William now? Thomas's expression shifted, taking on a practiced sadness. I'm afraid I don't know. We lost touch after the war. I've been searching for him for years. When I heard about the land claim here in Wyoming, I thought perhaps I might find him, or at least claim what's rightfully his. Family looking out for family, you understand. James understood perfectly. He understood that this was a snake wearing a man's skin. He understood that Silas Blackwood and Thomas Carter were likely working together. He understood that Emma was being attacked from multiple angles, and she had no idea just how dirty this fight was about to get. You say you're William's brother, James said carefully. What regiment did he serve in during the war? Thomas barely hesitated. The 14th Ohio Infantry. Wrong. James had asked the question as a test, and Thomas had failed. Will had served with the 20th Maine, had talked about it often, especially after too much whiskey, and the nightmares started. This man was a fraud. James kept his face neutral, taking a sip of his beer to buy time. He needed to think, needed to figure out his next move. If he called Thomas out now without proof, it would just be one man's word against another. Thomas had documents, James was sure, forged but convincing enough to fool a land office clerk. No, James needed to be smarter than that, needed to gather evidence, needed to protect Emma. That's quite a story, James said finally. I hope you find your brother. Actually, I was hoping you might help with that. Thomas leaned forward. You said your name was Mitchell, James Mitchell. I've heard that name before. Weren't you in Colorado? Around 1873 mining country. James's hand tightened on his beer glass. I've been in a lot of places. Right. It's just that I heard William might have been in Colorado around that time. Thought maybe you'd run across him. Colorado's a big territory, lots of miners. But you knew an Emma Hayes. You spoke to her this morning, about William. Thomas's smile never wavered, but his eyes had gone cold. See, I make it my business to know things. And I heard you tell Miss Hayes that you knew my brother, that you worked with him. James set his beer down very carefully. This conversation had just turned dangerous. Thomas wasn't just a con man. He was someone with connections, someone who'd already started gathering information about potential obstacles, someone who saw James as a threat. I might have crossed paths with a William Carter in Colorado, James said slowly. Mining camps are full of men, hard to remember every face. But you remembered Emma Hayes. Man doesn't forget a woman like that. Thomas studied him for a long moment. Then he smiled again, all false warmth. I'm sure we can all work this out like civilized people. Miss Hayes seems like a reasonable woman. I'm sure once I explain that I'm William's brother, that I have legal documents proving our relationship, she'll understand that the land belongs to family. And if she doesn't, then the law will decide. Thomas stood dropping coins on the table for his whiskey. It's been a pleasure talking with you, Mr. Mitchell. I hope you enjoy your stay in Clearwater, though I imagine you'll be moving on soon with that cattle drive. Dangerous work keeping 2,000 head moving north. Be a shame if something spooked them. Stampede could kill a man easy. The threat hung in the air like gun smoke. I'm not easy to kill, James said quietly. No one is, until they are. Thomas tipped his hat. Good evening, Mr. Mitchell. James sat alone in the corner, his beer forgotten, his mind racing. This was worse than he'd thought. Thomas Carter was connected to Blackwood, that much was obvious. They had a plan to steal Emma's land, and they weren't afraid to use violence if necessary. The stampede comment wasn't idle talk. It was a warning. Stay out of this, or people die. James thought about the letter in his pocket, about his promise to Will, about duty and honor, and all the words men used to justify the choices they made. Then he thought about Emma standing alone in that crowd this morning, fighting to hold on to the last piece of the man she'd loved. Thought about Henry, orphaned and scared. Thought about all the ways the world ground good people down and kept right on grinding. He stood leaving money for his drink and walked out into the twilight. The boarding house was 3 blocks away. Mrs. Grace Thompson's place, Emma had said. Everyone knew where it was. James found it easily enough. A 2-story frame building with a wide porch and lace curtains in the windows. Respectable, clean, the kind of place a school teacher would stay. Emma sat on the porch steps waiting. She stood when she saw him approach. "Mr. Mitchell." "Ma'am." They stood in awkward silence for a moment. Then Emma gestured to the steps. "Would you like to sit? Mrs. Thompson has tea if you'd prefer to go inside, but I thought, out here is fine." James sat, leaving proper distance between them. His mother would have been proud of that at least. Some manners survived even 8 years on cattle trails. Emma sat beside him, arranging her skirts. "I spoke with Reverend Halloway this afternoon. The Daltons would very much like to meet Henry. They asked if we could bring him to their farm tomorrow. It's about 3 miles outside town. That's good news. Henry will like that. They're good people. They lost their son Samuel 2 years ago. They've been grieving ever since." She paused. "Sometimes I think the hardest part about losing someone isn't the death itself. It's the waiting afterward, the hoping they'll come back even when you know they can't." James's chest tightened. This was it, the opening. He should take it, should tell her about Will, about the mine, about the 4 years that stood between that moment and this one. "Miss Hayes," he began. "Emma, please. After what you did this morning helping with Henry, I think we can dispense with formalities." "Emma, then." Her name felt strange on his tongue, intimate. "I need to tell you something, about William Carter, about Colorado." She turned to face him fully, and the hope in her eyes nearly killed him. "You do know where he is?" James stopped. James found he couldn't say the words. Not yet. Not here on a porch with lamplight spilling from windows and the sound of normal life continuing around them. "It's complicated." "Is he alive?" The question hung between them. James opened his mouth, closed it, felt the letter in his pocket like a lead weight. "I need to ask you something first," he said instead. "Coward. He was a coward. Did William ever mention having a brother, a man named Thomas?" Emma frowned. "No. Will was an only child. He told me that several times." "Why do you ask?" "Because I met a man tonight who claims to be William Carter's brother. Says he's come to claim the land on William's behalf." All the color drained from Emma's face. "But that's not possible." "I know. Which means he's lying. Which means you're in more trouble than you thought." James leaned forward, urgency replacing hesitation. "Emma, listen to me. This Thomas Carter, he's working with Silas Blackwood. They're trying to steal your land. And they're not going to stop just because you have William's old documents. They're going to fight dirty." "Then I'll fight back. This isn't Boston drawing room fighting. This is frontier fighting. These are dangerous men. And I'm just a helpless woman who needs protecting." Steel entered her voice. "Is that what you think?" "No." James met her gaze steadily. "I think you're the strongest person I've seen in a long time. I think you've got more spine than most men I know. But I also think you're alone, and I'm offering to stand with you, not because you're weak, because you shouldn't have to face this alone." Emma's expression softened slightly. "Why? Why would you do this? You said it yourself. We just met. You owe me nothing." "Because I owe Will everything. Because I'm the reason he's dead. Because keeping you safe is the only way I can make peace with what happened in that mine." James couldn't say any of that. So he said something simpler, something truer in its own way. "Because it's the right thing to do." They sat in silence, the night settling around them. James could hear piano music from somewhere down the street, laughter, the normal sounds of people living normal lives. Finally, Emma spoke. "All right, I accept your help, but I need you to tell me the truth. About Will. About what happened in Colorado. I've been waiting 5 years for answers. I can't wait anymore." James took a breath. This was it. No more delays, no more excuses. "Tomorrow," he said. "After we take Henry to the Daltons. I'll tell you everything tomorrow. I promise." It was another broken promise in a long line of them. Another delay. Another failure. But Emma nodded, accepting it. "Tomorrow, then." She stood smoothing her skirts. James stood too, reaching for his hat. "Emma." "Yes. William loved you. Whatever else you learn, whatever I tell you tomorrow, remember that. He loved you until his last breath." Her eyes filled with tears again, and this time one escaped tracking down her cheek before she could stop it. "Last breath. You said last breath. Does that mean—" The sound of shattering glass interrupted her. Shouting. The smell of smoke suddenly thick on the air. James turned toward the commotion. 3 blocks away toward the center of town, orange light flickered against the night sky. Fire. "Stay here," he ordered, already running toward the flames. Behind him, Emma's voice carried, "Like hell I will." The general store was burning. Flames licked up the wooden walls, consuming the dry timber with terrifying speed. Black smoke poured from the windows. People were running, shouting, forming a bucket brigade from the water pump in the street. James saw the store owner stumbling out the front door, coughing, his face blackened with soot. Behind him the interior glowed like the mouth of hell. "My wife," the man gasped. "She's still inside. Back room." No one moved. The fire was too hot, too fast. Going in there would be suicide. James ran anyway. The heat hit him like a physical blow. Smoke filled his lungs, choking him. He dropped low where the air was clearer, covering his mouth with his bandana. The flames roared around him, consuming everything. Shelves, goods, the counter. In the back, through the smoke, he saw movement. A figure collapsed on the floor. James lunged forward, grabbing the woman under her arms. She was unconscious, dead weight. The ceiling groaned above them. Embers rained down. He dragged her toward the front door muscles, screaming. The smoke was thicker now, black as pitch. He couldn't see, couldn't breathe. His vision narrowed to a tunnel. Almost there. Just a few more feet. His boot caught on something. Debris. He went down hard, the woman falling with him. Above a beam cracked, started to fall. Arms grabbed him, hauled him up. Old Jake's face appeared through the smoke, and together they dragged the woman out into the blessed cool air of the night. James collapsed on the street, coughing so hard he thought his lungs would tear apart. Someone thrust water at him. He drank, coughed, drank again. When his vision cleared, he saw Emma kneeling beside the store owner's wife, checking her breathing. The woman was alive, coughing, but alive. Emma had torn her petticoat into strips and was wrapping the woman's burned hands with efficient, practiced movements. The fire continued to burn, but the bucket brigade was making progress. It wouldn't spread to other buildings. They'd been lucky. "You're an idiot," Jake said beside him. "Yeah." "A brave idiot, but still an idiot." "Yeah." Emma looked up, met James's eyes across the distance. Something passed between them. Understanding. Recognition. The beginning of trust. Then the sheriff appeared, examining the burned-out shell of the store. He bent down, picking up something from the ground near the entrance. A rag. He sniffed it, then held it up. "Kerosene," he announced. This fire was set deliberate. The crowd murmured. Shock. Anger. Fear. James's gaze found Thomas Carter standing at the edge of the crowd, watching with detached interest. Their eyes met. Thomas smiled, tipped his hat, walked away into the darkness. Message received, message delivered. Stay out of this or next time someone dies. James looked at Emma, at Henry, who had appeared from somewhere and now clung to old Jake's leg, frightened by the chaos. At this town full of people just trying to survive another day on the frontier. He thought about the letter in his pocket, about promises to dead men and debts that never seemed to get paid. Then he thought about what Will would say if he could see this, if he could see Emma threatened and a child in danger and evil men hiding behind false respectability. Will would fight. Will had never backed down from a challenge in his life, and James had promised to honor his memory. "Tomorrow," he said quietly, more to himself than anyone else. "Tomorrow I tell her everything. Tomorrow we end this." Jake heard him. The old man nodded. "About damn time." Emma approached her dress stained with soot and blood from tending the injured woman. "Mr. Mitchell, James, are you all right?" "I'm fine." "That was very brave. Very foolish, but very brave. Just doing what needed doing." She studied his face in the firelight. "There's more to you than I thought. Most men would have let the fire burn, let someone else take the risk. I'm not most men." "No." A smile ghosted across her lips. "You're not." She turned to go, then looked back. "Tomorrow. The Daltons' farm. 9 o'clock. Don't be late." "I won't." She walked away, and James watched her go. Strong, capable, beautiful in a way that had nothing to do with softness and everything to do with steel wrapped in grace. Will James thought you were a lucky man, and a fool for leaving her. Tomorrow he would tell her the truth. Tomorrow he would show her the letter. Tomorrow he would finally let the dead rest. But tonight he had a different mission. Tonight he was going to find out everything there was to know about Thomas Carter and Silas Blackwood. He was going to gather evidence, build a case, prepare for war, because Emma Hayes deserved justice, Henry deserved a home, and Will deserved to have his final wish honored. Tomorrow the truth would come out. But tonight James Mitchell was going to make damn sure that when it did, Emma wouldn't face it alone. The letter in his pocket crinkled as he walked back toward camp. 4 years he'd carried it. 4 years of running from the past. Tomorrow, that ended. Tomorrow, he would finally start running toward something instead. Morning came too soon, and not soon enough. James had spent the night restless, alternating between staring at the stars and watching the letter by firelight. He'd read it so many times the paper had grown thin at the creases, threatening to tear along the folds. Will's handwriting was steady in the first paragraphs, growing shakier toward the end as pain and morphine blurred the lines between consciousness and whatever came after. "James, if you're reading this, I'm gone. The mine got me, didn't it? Don't blame yourself. I know you will, but don't. Life's a gamble out here. We both knew it. Find Emma Hayes. Tell her I'm sorry. Tell her I loved her until my last breath. Tell her don't wait for me. Don't spend her life on a ghost. And James, brother, listen to me carefully. If you ever find her, and if she's still unmarried, and if you feel even a fraction of what I suspect you feel, love her." James had never let himself read that last part before. Had always stopped at the apology, the declaration of love, the release from waiting. But now, with dawn approaching, and a promise he could no longer delay, he forced himself to see the words Will had written in those final moments. "You're a good man. The best man I know. You'd treat her right. You'd give her the life I couldn't. Don't waste years feeling guilty. I'm giving you my blessing. Hell, I'm ordering you. Love her, James. Make her happy." James folded the letter with shaking hands and tucked it back into his pocket. Then he saddled his horse, collected Henry from where the boy slept, curled in blankets near Jake's bedroll, and rode toward Clearwater as the sun painted the prairie gold. Emma was waiting at the schoolhouse wearing a simple gray dress that made her eyes look like storm clouds. She'd arranged for a horse, and she sat the saddle with the ease of someone who'd learned to ride young and never forgotten. Not a delicate Eastern lady at all. Will had gotten so much wrong. Henry climbed up behind James without complaint, and the three of them set out toward the Dalton farm in silence, heavy with unspoken words. The land rolled away in all directions, grass rippling like water in the morning breeze. Somewhere overhead a hawk circled. James watched it, envying its freedom, its ability to simply fly away from difficult conversations and impossible promises. "Tell me about Colorado," Emma said finally. Her voice was steady, but James heard the tremor underneath. "Tell me about Will." This was it, the moment. No more delays. "We met in the spring of 1872. James began the words coming easier than he'd expected once he started. I'd been drifting after the war, tried ranching, tried scouting. Nothing stuck. Ended up in the mining camps because I needed money and didn't much care if I lived or died. That's dark. It was a dark time. James kept his eyes on the horizon. Easier to speak the truth when he didn't have to see her face. Will showed up at the same camp about a month after me. He'd come from Wyoming. Said he'd staked a land claim but needed to save money before he could prove it up. Figured mining would be faster than ranching. He always was impatient, Emma said softly. Even before the war, always looking for the quick path. We got partnered up on a claim, just the two of us working a shaft that had been abandoned by the previous crew. Will was convinced there was a vein down there, something the others had missed, and he was right. We started pulling out decent silver, nothing that would make us rich but enough to save, enough to dream. Henry shifted behind him. James felt the boy's small hands gripping his shirt, holding on tight. Children understood more than adults gave them credit for. Henry knew this story wouldn't have a happy ending. Will talked about you all the time, James continued. About your letters. About the land in Wyoming. About the house he was going to build and the life you'd have together. The other miners used to tease him about it, but he didn't care. You were his North Star, the reason he got up every morning and went down into that dark hole. Emma's breath hitched. James risked a glance at her. Tears tracked down her cheeks, but she didn't wipe them away, just let them fall while she listened. "What happened?" she asked. James swallowed hard. This was the part he'd rehearsed 1,000 times and never found the right words for. It was March 1873. We'd been working the claim for almost a year. The vein was playing out, but Will was convinced if we went deeper, we'd find more. I agreed with him. It was my idea to shore up the tunnel and push further down. The hawk circled lower, and James watched it dive toward something in the grass. Successful. It rose with prey clutched in its talons. The supports weren't strong enough. We knew that, but we were impatient. Stupid. We figured we'd get one more good haul and then quit. One more week. But you didn't get a week, Emma said quietly. We got 3 days. The shaft collapsed on the 4th. James's voice had gone rough. I was near the entrance. Will was deeper in. The roof came down between us. I could hear him shouting, but I couldn't reach him. I tried. God, I tried. But every time I pulled away a rock, 2 more fell. Finally got through after maybe 20 minutes. It felt like hours. He stopped. Couldn't continue. The memory was too vivid. Will's face in the lamplight, pale and twisted with pain. The way his breathing had rattled. The blood that came up when he coughed. He was alive when you reached him, Emma said. Not a question, a statement. For about 10 minutes. Long enough to write a letter. Long enough to make me promise I'd find you. Long enough to tell me he was sorry for not being the man you deserved. And then he died. And then he died. The Dalton farm appeared ahead, a cluster of buildings against the endless sky. They rode in silence for another minute before Emma spoke again. You've been carrying this for 4 years. Yes. Why didn't you find me sooner? James had asked himself that question 10,000 times, had come up with a dozen excuses. The trail had been cold. He didn't know where to look. He was afraid. He wasn't ready. All true, all inadequate. Because I blamed myself, he said finally. Because it was my idea to go deeper. My fault the shaft collapsed. My fault Will died while I lived. And I couldn't face you knowing that. Couldn't look you in the eye and tell you I killed the man you loved. You didn't kill him. Emma's voice was fierce. Accidents happen. Minds collapse. That's the risk of that life. Will knew it. He chose it anyway. Doesn't make me feel less guilty. No, she agreed. I don't suppose it would. They reached the farm, dismounted, helped Henry down. The Daltons came out to greet them, a couple in their 40s with kind faces and gentle hands. Eleanor Dalton took one look at Henry and started crying happy tears. Robert Dalton showed the boy the horses and the barn and the field where they grew wheat. James and Emma stood aside watching Henry slowly relax. watching hope replace fear in those two serious eyes. "He'll be happy here," Emma said. "Yes. And will you be happy knowing you kept your promise?" James turned to look at her fully for the first time since they'd started talking. Her face was wet with tears, but her expression was calm, almost peaceful. "I don't know," he admitted. "I've been carrying this weight so long I'm not sure what comes after." Emma reached out, took his hand. Her fingers were small but strong, calloused from work. Real hands, honest hands. "Thank you," she said simply, "for telling me, for keeping his promise, for giving me the truth even though it hurt. I'm sorry it took so long." "So am I. But you're here now, and that matters." They stood together in the morning sun, holding hands like children, while Henry laughed for the first time in weeks, and the Daltons made plans, and the world kept turning despite the weight of grief and guilt and all the ways the past refused to let go. Later, riding back to Clearwater with just the two of them, Emma said, "I want to see the letter, the one Will wrote." James pulled it from his pocket without hesitation. He'd carried it alone long enough. Emma read it slowly, lips moving slightly as she traced the words. When she reached the end, the part about James loving her, her eyes widened. She looked up at him, questions written across her face. "Did you know about this part?" she asked. "When you came looking for me?" "No, I never read that far. Stopped at the part where he asked me to find you, to tell you he was sorry. The rest felt too private. But you've read it now. Last night, before coming here." Emma looked back at the letter, reading that final paragraph again. "Love her, James. Make her happy." "He gave you permission," she said wonderingly. "Or more than permission, he ordered you." "Will always did like to be in charge." James tried to smile, but it felt wrong on his face. "And what do you think about it? About his order?" James considered lying, considered deflecting, considered all the ways he could protect himself from this moment. Instead, he told the truth. "I think it's too soon. I think you've just learned the man you waited for is dead. I think you need time to grieve properly. And I think mixing grief and guilt with anything else is a recipe for disaster." "That's very sensible." "I'm a sensible man." "Are you?" Emma's gray eyes held his, seeing through him like glass. "Because a sensible man wouldn't ride 300 miles to keep a promise to a dead friend. A sensible man wouldn't run into a burning building to save a stranger. A sensible man wouldn't offer to stand with a woman he just met against men who'd happily kill him. Maybe I'm not as sensible as I thought. Maybe you're something better." They rode in silence after that, but it was a different kind of silence, not heavy with secrets anymore, just quiet, peaceful, the kind of silence two people could share when they'd stopped hiding from each other. Chapter 5. The Conspiracy. The town was buzzing when they returned. Not about the fire, though, that was still on everyone's lips. About something else. Something worse. A man had come to the Dalton farm early that morning before James and Emma arrived. A man claiming to be Henry's uncle, claiming the right to take the boy. James felt his blood turn to ice. "What was his name?" he demanded of the crowd gathered near the general store. "Morrison," someone said. "Frank Morrison. Said his sister was the boy's mother. Said he's got legal right to the child." Frank Morrison. The name rang through James's head like a bell. He knew that name, knew it from Colorado, from the mining camps where men drank too much and gambled away their earnings and ran cons on anyone foolish enough to trust them. Frank Morrison was a fraud, a thief, a man who'd been run out of 3 territories for claim jumping and theft, and he'd just tried to claim Henry. James wheeled his horse around. "We need to get back to the Daltons, now." Emma didn't question, just spurred her horse forward. They rode hard, pushing the animals faster than was safe. When they reached the farm, they found Robert Dalton standing on his porch with a rifle across his lap. "He came back," Robert said grimly. "About an hour after you left. Tried to take the boy by force. Eleanor's inside with Henry. Boy's terrified." "Where's Morrison now?" James asked, already knowing the answer. "Rode off. Said he'd be back with the law. Said we had no right to keep his nephew from him. James dismounted, thinking fast. Frank Morrison working with Thomas Carter, both of them connected to Silas Blackwood. The pattern was becoming clear. They were using Henry as leverage, as a distraction. While everyone focused on protecting the boy, Thomas could solidify his claim on the land. "He's not Henry's uncle," James said. "Frank Morrison is a con man. I knew him in Colorado. He's working with Thomas Carter and Silas Blackwood." "Then why would they want the boy?" Emma asked. "Because the Daltons' land borders the Carter claim. If they control Henry, they control Robert and Eleanor. And if they control the Daltons, they control the testimony about who really owns that land." Understanding dawned in Emma's eyes. This isn't just about one plot of land. It's bigger. Much bigger. James turned to Robert. "How much land does Silas Blackwood own in this territory?" "Most of it," Robert said slowly. "He's been buying up claims for the past 5 years. Always manages to get them cheap. Always seems to know which ones are valuable before anyone else does." "Because he owns the assay office," James said, pieces clicking into place. "He knows where the minerals are. He's been stealing claims from people who don't realize what they're sitting on." Emma's face had gone pale. "The Carter claim. Will's land. There's something valuable there, isn't there?" "That's my guess." "So what do we do?" Robert asked. James looked at the three of them. A farmer with a rifle, a schoolteacher in a gray dress, an orphan boy hiding inside with tears on his face, people just trying to survive, people who deserved better than to be pawns in a rich man's game. "We fight back," James said. "We gather evidence, we expose them, and we protect Henry no matter what it takes." Emma stepped forward. "I'll go into town, talk to people, find out who else Blackwood has stolen from. There must be others." "That could be dangerous," James warned. "I don't care." Steel entered her voice. "I've been pushed around long enough. Time to push back." James felt something shift in his chest. Pride, respect, something deeper he wasn't ready to name. "All right," he said, "but you don't go alone, and you don't do anything stupid. Stupid like running into a burning building. Exactly like that." The faintest smile touched her lips. "I'll be careful, I promise." They made plans. Emma would investigate in town. James would ride to the neighboring ranches, see if anyone else had been threatened by Blackwood or his men. Robert would stay at the farm with Eleanor and Henry, rifle loaded and ready. Before they parted, Emma caught James's arm. "When this is over," she said quietly, "when we've dealt with Blackwood and saved the land and made sure Henry is safe, when all of this is over, I want to talk about what Will wrote, about what comes next." James's heart kicked against his ribs. "Emma, I'm not asking for promises. I'm not asking for anything right now except that you'll still be here, that you won't disappear the moment your duty is fulfilled." "I'll be here." "Good." She released his arm, but her touch lingered like a brand. "Be careful, James Mitchell. I just found you. I don't want to lose you too." She rode away before he could respond, leaving him standing in the yard with words caught in his throat and Will's letter burning in his pocket. Love her, James. He was trying. God help him, he was trying. The next 2 days passed in a blur of activity and mounting tension. Emma worked quietly but effectively, visiting families under the guise of discussing their children's education. But really she was asking questions, listening, gathering stories about land claims that had mysteriously changed hands, about families who'd been forced out, about Silas Blackwood's steady accumulation of power and property. What she discovered made her blood boil. Blackwood had stolen from at least 5 other families in the past 3 years. Always the same pattern. Wait until the original claimant died or disappeared. Move in with forged documents or legal technicalities. Take the land for a fraction of its value. Resell it later for massive profit once the minerals were extracted. He was a vulture, a predator in expensive clothes and a council member's badge. But proving it would be difficult. Blackwood was careful. He kept his records clean. He had lawyers and judges in his pocket. Fighting him through legal channels would take time and money Emma didn't have. They needed another approach. James spent his time riding the territory, talking to ranchers and miners and anyone who might have crossed paths with Thomas Carter or Frank Morrison. What he learned confirmed his suspicions. Both men were known criminals. Both had warrants in multiple territories. Both had disappeared from Colorado around the same time Will died. Had they been there? Had they seen the mine collapse? Had they somehow been involved? James couldn't prove it, but the timing felt too convenient to be coincidence. He also learned something else, something that made his skin crawl with anger. Frank Morrison had tried to claim 2 other children in the past 3 years. Both times he'd used the same story: grieving uncle, legal rights, family duty. Both times he'd taken the children and they were never seen again, sold most likely, to workhouses or worse. Henry wasn't the first. He was just the latest target. That knowledge lit a fire in James's belly that no amount of reason could extinguish. They weren't just fighting for land now. They were fighting for a child's life. On the 3rd day, the pressure came to a head. James arrived in town to find Emma standing outside the schoolhouse with tears in her eyes and fury in her expression. A group of parents stood nearby, faces hard with judgment. "What happened?" James asked, already knowing it wouldn't be good. "They're pulling their children from school," Emma said, voice shaking with controlled anger. "Because I've been asking questions. Because I've been stirring up trouble. Because Blackwood told them I'm dangerous." One of the mothers stepped forward, Mrs. Henderson, wife of the mercantile owner. "It's not personal, Miss Hayes, but we have to think of our children. Mr. Blackwood says you're filling their heads with lies about upstanding citizens, says you're trying to cause division in the community." "I'm trying to expose corruption," Emma said clearly. "I'm trying to help families who've been robbed. That's not your place." This from Mr. Jenkins, one of the town councilmen. "You're a school teacher. You should stick to teaching. And if I refuse, then we'll find another teacher." Jenkins's face was apologetic but firm. "One who doesn't bring trouble." James felt his hands curl into fists. He forced them open. Violence wouldn't help here. This was exactly what Blackwood wanted: drive Emma out, isolate her, make the problem go away. "You're making a mistake," James said quietly. "Blackwood is using you. He's stealing from your neighbors, and you're helping him do it by staying silent." "You're just a drifter," Mrs. Henderson said dismissively. "You don't understand how things work here. Mr. Blackwood has been good to this town. He's brought business and prosperity. We're not going to turn on him because some outsiders make accusations." "Then you're cowards." Emma's voice cut like glass. "All of you. You see injustice happening and you turn away because it's easier, because it's safer. Well, I won't. Fire me if you want. Take your children away. But I won't stop fighting for what's right." She turned and walked into the schoolhouse, slamming the door behind her. The parents dispersed, muttering among themselves. James started to follow Emma, then stopped. There was another way, a better way. He caught up with Mrs. Henderson as she headed toward the mercantile. "Ma'am, a word." She turned, eyebrow raised. "I have nothing more to say to you, Mr. Mitchell." "Then just listen. 3 years ago, Silas Blackwood bought the Peterson claim for $50. You remember the Petersons' good family, lost their father to cholera. Mother couldn't work the land alone with 3 children. Blackwood offered to buy, said it was worthless land, said $50 was generous." Mrs. Henderson frowned. "I remember. They moved back east. What of it?" "That worthless land had a silver vein running through it. Blackwood knew. He'd had it assayed secretly. He extracted over $10,000 worth of silver in the next 2 years. The Peterson widow and her children got $50. Blackwood got $10,000. You can't prove that." "I can. I've talked to the miners who worked that claim. I've seen the assay reports Blackwood thought were destroyed, and that's just one example." James held her gaze. "How many other families has he robbed? How many children went hungry because Blackwood stole their inheritance?" Something flickered in Mrs. Henderson's expression. Doubt, guilt, the beginning of understanding. "Why are you telling me this?" she asked. Because you have children, because you're not a bad person, you're just scared. And I understand that. Blackwood is powerful, crossing him is dangerous, but letting him continue is worse. Even if what you say is true, what can we do? He has lawyers, money, influence. You can testify. You can tell the truth. You can stand with Emma when she needs you. James paused. And you can remember that your children are watching. What are you teaching them? That power makes right, that staying safe is more important than doing good. Mrs. Henderson's eyes filled with tears. You don't understand. My husband's business depends on Blackwood's goodwill. If we cross him, he could destroy us. He's going to destroy you anyway, eventually. That's what men like Blackwood do. They take and take until there's nothing left. James gentled his voice. But if enough people stand together, he can't hurt you all. There's power in numbers. There's safety in truth. She stood silent for a long moment, wrestling with fear and conscience. Finally, she nodded. I'll think about it. That's all I can promise. That's enough, for now. James found Emma in the schoolhouse sitting at her desk with her head in her hands. She looked up when he entered and he saw the exhaustion in her face, the weight of fighting alone for too long. They're going to fire me, she said flatly. By the end of the week I'll have no students and no income. Blackwood wins again. No. James crossed the room, crouched beside her chair. He doesn't win. We just need to be smarter, more patient. I'm tired of being patient, James. I've been patient for 5 years. Look where it got me. It got you here, to this moment, where you're fighting for something real instead of waiting for something that was never going to come. She looked at him, really looked at him, and something passed between them. Recognition, understanding, the knowledge that they were bound together now by more than Will's memory, by choice, by shared purpose, by something neither of them was quite ready to name. Tell me honestly, Emma said quietly, do you think we can win against Blackwood and his money and his power? James thought about lying, about giving her false hope, about making promises he couldn't keep. Instead, he told her the truth. I don't know, but I know we have to try. Because if we don't, if we just walk away, then men like Blackwood keep winning, and people like Henry keep suffering, and Will's sacrifice means nothing. Will's sacrifice. Emma's hand found his fingers intertwining. Or yours. Both, maybe. They sat like that for a long moment, hands clasped, drawing strength from each other. Then Emma straightened, pulling away, and James saw the steel return to her spine. All right, she said. We fight, but we fight smart. What's our next move? James stood, feeling the familiar clarity that came with having a mission, a purpose, something to fight for besides his own guilt. We need proof, real, undeniable proof of Blackwood's corruption, and I think I know where to find it. Where? The assay office, after dark, when no one's watching. Emma's eyes widened. You're talking about breaking in. That's illegal. So is stealing land from widows and orphans. Sometimes you have to bend the law to serve justice. That's dangerous logic. Maybe, but it's all we've got. Emma stood smoothing her skirts, decision made. Then we do it tonight, together. Emma, no. If we get caught, you'll lose everything. Your reputation, your teaching position may be worse. Let me handle this alone. Absolutely not. Her jaw set in a line James was beginning to recognize, the line that meant arguing would be pointless. I'm not letting you take all the risk while I sit safely aside. We're partners in this. Partners share the danger. Partners. James tested the word, liked the way it felt. Is that what we are? I think so, don't you? He thought about Will's letter, about permission and duty and the way Emma's hand had felt in his, about how she looked with fire in her eyes and determination in her voice. Yeah, he said softly. I think we are. That night James and Emma met at the edge of town, both dressed in dark clothes. The moon was a sliver, providing just enough light to navigate by, but not enough to be easily seen. Perfect conditions for what they had to do. The assay office sat on a quiet side street, a small wooden building that looked innocent enough. But inside those walls lay the evidence they needed, the proof of Blackwood's crimes, the weapon they could use to bring him down. "Are you sure about this?" James asked one final time. Emma's answer was to pick the lock with a hairpin movements quick and efficient. The door swung open with barely a sound. James stared at her. "Where did you learn to do that?" "Boston isn't all tea parties and etiquette lessons." A ghost of a smile. "My brother taught me before he died. Said a lady should have practical skills." They slipped inside, closing the door behind them. James lit a small lantern, keeping the flame low. The office was neat, organized, professional-looking. Ledgers lined the shelves. Maps covered the walls, each marked with mineral deposits and survey results. "You take the desk," James whispered. "I'll check the file cabinets." They worked quickly but carefully, mindful of leaving things as they found them. Minutes ticked by. James found survey reports, assay results, correspondence with mining companies, all legitimate looking on the surface. Then Emma made a soft sound of discovery. "James, look at this." She'd found a hidden compartment in the desk, revealed by pressing a specific spot on the underside of a drawer. Inside lay a second set of ledgers. These ones told a different story. Names and dates, properties and values. The real assay results next to the falsified ones Blackwood had given to landowners. Amounts paid versus actual worth. It was all there. Every theft, every fraud, every crime laid out in Blackwood's own meticulous handwriting. "This is it," Emma breathed. "This is everything we need." James felt triumph surge through him. They had him. They finally had him. Then he heard the sound of horses outside, multiple riders, moving fast. "Out, now!" James grabbed Emma's arm, pulling her toward the back door. But before they could reach it, the front door crashed open. Silas Blackwood stood in the doorway, flanked by 3 men James recognized from around town, all armed, all looking like they'd been waiting for exactly this moment. "Well, well," Blackwood said smoothly. "Breaking and entering, theft of private documents. That's serious business, Mr. Mitchell. Miss Hayes." James moved to shield Emma, his mind racing through options. They were trapped, outnumbered, and Blackwood had clearly been expecting them. Someone had talked. Someone had betrayed them. "Those documents prove you're a thief," Emma said, voice steady despite the danger. "They prove you've been stealing from people for years." "They prove nothing. Just the wild accusations of a desperate woman and the drifter helping her." Blackwood smiled. "Who do you think people will believe, a respected councilman, or an Eastern spinster and a cowboy with no reputation?" "The truth," James said quietly. "Eventually people believe the truth. Eventually isn't good enough. By the time anyone believes you, if they ever do, you'll both be long gone from Clearwater." Blackwood gestured to his men. "Take them to the sheriff. Charges of breaking and entering, attempted theft, and conspiracy to commit fraud." As the men moved forward, James calculated his chances. He could fight, probably take down 2 of them before the others overwhelmed him. But Emma would get hurt, and fighting would only make things worse legally. Better to go peacefully. Better to fight this battle in court, even if the court was as corrupt as everything else Blackwood touched. They were marched through town past late-night stragglers who stopped to stare. Word would spread fast. By morning everyone would know. The schoolteacher and the cowboy caught breaking into the assay office. Criminals, troublemakers, just like Blackwood said. The jail was a small building behind the sheriff's office. 2 cells, both empty until now. The sheriff, a man named Carson, who James had pegged as either corrupt or incompetent from the start, locked them in separate cells with apologetic efficiency. "Nothing personal, folks. Just doing my job." "Your job is to protect people," Emma said sharply, "not to help thieves." "That's a serious accusation, Miss Hayes. One you should be careful making." After the sheriff left, Emma and James stood at their respective cell doors, close enough to talk but unable to touch. The bars between them felt symbolic, a barrier they couldn't cross. "I'm sorry," James said. "I should have known it was a trap. Should have been more careful." "We both should have." Emma wrapped her hands around the bars. "But we tried. That counts for something." "Does it? You're going to lose your teaching position now, your reputation, everything you built here." I built it on lies, James, on pretending I was fine when I wasn't, on waiting for something that was never coming. She met his eyes. Maybe losing it all is exactly what I need. Clean slate, fresh start. That's awfully optimistic for someone locked in a jail cell. One of us has to be optimistic. You're doing enough brooding for both of us. Despite everything, James felt a smile tug at his lips. Fair point. They fell silent, each lost in their own thoughts. Outside, the night deepened. Hours passed. James dozed fitfully, his back against the stone wall, his mind cycling through scenarios and solutions and finding nothing but dead ends. Then around what must have been 3 a.m, the jail door opened. Old Jake stepped inside, followed by Robert Dalton and Reverend Halloway. Behind them came a man James didn't recognize, wearing a U.S. Marshal's badge. "Sorry for the delay," Jake said cheerfully. "Had to ride to Pine Ridge to fetch the proper law. Meet Marshal Price. He's very interested in hearing about Silas Blackwood's business dealings." James felt hope surge for the first time in hours. "How did you know we'd been arrested?" "Sarah Murphy saw them take you, came straight to the camp." Jake's weathered face split in a grin. "You think we were going to let our scout rot in jail? Not likely." Marshal Price stepped forward, a lean man in his 50s with eyes that missed nothing. "Mr. Mitchell, Miss Hayes, I understand you have information about land fraud in this territory." "We do," Emma said quickly. "We found evidence in Blackwood's office. Ledgers showing his real assay results versus what he told landowners. Proof of theft going back years." "That evidence was obtained illegally," the sheriff protested from where he'd been sleeping at his desk. "Can't be used in court." "Actually it can," Marshal Price said mildly. "If I have reasonable suspicion of ongoing criminal activity, I can seize any and all relevant documents. And thanks to these fine folks, I now have very reasonable suspicion." He looked at the sheriff. "Open those cells. These people are free to go." The sheriff hesitated, clearly torn between his loyalty to Blackwood and his survival instinct regarding a U.S. Marshal. Survival won. He unlocked the cells. James stepped out immediately, going to Emma. Without thinking, he pulled her into his arms, relief flooding through him at the feeling of her safe and whole against him. She hugged him back just as tightly. "Thank you," James said to Jake and the others. "I owe you." "You don't owe us anything," Robert said firmly. "You were trying to help. That's what neighbors do. They help." "Besides," Jake added with a wink, "I had to make sure you'd be alive to scout for us in Montana. Hank would kill me if I let you get hanged in Wyoming." Marshal Price cleared his throat. "If you're quite finished with your reunion, I'd like to get those ledgers tonight, before Blackwood has a chance to destroy them." "They're in his desk," Emma said. "Hidden compartment. I can show you." They moved as a group through the sleeping town, Emma leading them to the assay office. This time the door was opened legally with the marshal's authority behind it. They retrieved the ledgers along with maps and correspondence that painted a devastating picture of corruption. As dawn broke over Clearwater, they had enough evidence to bring down not just Blackwood, but several of his associates. The scope of the conspiracy was larger than James had imagined. It reached into neighboring territories, touched dozens of lives, represented years of systematic theft. "This is going to take time to sort through," Marshal Price said, studying the documents. "But I've seen enough to issue arrest warrants. Where can I find Silas Blackwood?" "He has a house on the north end of town," Emma said. "Big place. Can't miss it." "Good. You folks should get some rest. You've done your part. Let the law handle it from here." But as the marshal and his deputies headed toward Blackwood's house, James felt unease prickle along his spine. Something wasn't right. It had all gone too smoothly. Blackwood was too smart to be caught this easily. "Emma," he said quietly, "where's Henry? Is he still at the Daltons?" Emma's face went pale. "As far as I know. Why?" "Because if I were Blackwood and I knew I was about to be arrested, I'd grab whatever leverage I could find." James was already moving toward the horses. "He's going after Henry." They rode hard sunrise, painting the sky blood red behind them. James pushed his horse faster than was safe. Emma matching him stride for stride. Behind them, Jake and Robert struggled to keep up. The Dalton farm appeared ahead, peaceful in the early light. Too peaceful. James's sense of dread intensified. They found Eleanor on the porch crying. Robert was there already, having ridden ahead. He held his wife, his face carved from stone. "They took him," Eleanor sobbed. "Frank Morrison came with 2 other men. They had guns. They took Henry." Emma dismounted, running to Eleanor. "When? How long ago?" "Maybe 20 minutes. They rode west toward the Badlands." James was already back on his horse. "How many men?" "3. Morrison and 2 others I didn't recognize." "Armed?" "Yes. Rifles and pistols both." James looked at Jake. The old man nodded, already understanding. They'd tracked men before. This was no different, except this time it was a child's life at stake. "I'm coming with you," Emma said, mounting her horse again. "Emma, no. This could get violent." "That boy trusts me. If you find him, if he's scared, he'll need a familiar face." Her jaw set in that familiar line. "I'm coming." James knew arguing would waste time they didn't have. "Fine, but you stay back when the shooting starts. You hear me?" "I hear you." They rode out, following the tracks west. The trail was easy enough to follow at first. 3 horses, 1 carrying double weight, moving fast but not running. Morrison thought he had time, thought no one would come after him until it was too late. He was wrong. The Badlands rose ahead, a maze of red rock canyons and dead-end gullies. Perfect place to hide. Perfect place for an ambush. James approached carefully, every sense alert. Then he heard it. A child's cry, quickly muffled. "Henry." James dismounted, signaling the others to stay quiet. He crept forward on foot, using the rocks for cover. Around a bend, he saw them. Morrison and his 2 men had made camp in a small canyon. Henry sat on the ground, hands tied, tears streaming down his face. The men were arguing amongst themselves. "Blackwood said to wait here until he contacted us," one of the men said. "We're supposed to use the kid as leverage to negotiate." "Blackwood's done," Morrison spat. "The marshals got him by now. We need to cut our losses and run." "What about the kid?" "What about him? Kid's worth nothing to us now. Should just leave him here." "Or worse," the 3rd man said darkly. "Dead kids can't identify us." James felt cold rage flood through him. These men were talking about murdering a child, casually, like it was nothing more than putting down a lame horse. He made a decision, pulled his pistol, stepped out from behind the rock. "Nobody moves," he said quietly. 3 heads snapped toward him. Morrison's hand went to his gun, then froze as Jake appeared on the opposite side of the canyon, rifle trained on them. A moment later, Robert stepped out from a 3rd position. They were surrounded. "Drop your weapons," James ordered. "Slowly. Any sudden moves and my friend Jake here will put a bullet through your spine. He's old, but he's an excellent shot." "Best in Texas," Jake confirmed cheerfully. "Course my eyes aren't what they used to be. Might miss your spine and hit something more painful." The men looked at each other, calculating odds. 3 of them, 3 of the rescuers, but the rescuers had position and surprise. Smart men would surrender. Morrison wasn't smart. He went for his gun. James fired first, shooting the pistol out of Morrison's hand. The man screamed, clutching his bleeding fingers. The other 2 threw up their hands immediately. "Don't shoot! Don't shoot! Get down on the ground, face down, hands behind your heads." They complied. James moved forward, kicked their weapons away, then went to Henry. The boy was trembling, tears running rivers down his dirty face. "It's all right, partner," James said softly, cutting through the ropes binding Henry's hands. "You're safe now. We've got you." Henry threw himself into James's arms, sobbing. James held him close, feeling the child's heart racing like a trapped bird's. Over Henry's head he saw Emma appear at the canyon entrance. Her face was pale, but calm. She came forward, took Henry gently from James, held him while he cried. "Shh, sweetheart. It's over. You're safe. No one's going to hurt you." "I was scared," Henry whispered. "They said they were going to—" "I know, but they were lying. They can't hurt you now. Mr. Mitchell and Mr. Jake stopped them. Henry looked up at James with eyes full of trust and gratitude. "You came for me." "Of course I did. I promised, didn't I? And I keep my promises." It was true, James realized. He did keep his promises. Maybe not always on time, maybe not always the way he intended, but he kept them eventually. He'd kept his promise to Will, had found Emma, told her the truth, given her closure. And now he'd kept his promise to Henry, had found him a home, had protected him from the men who would have done him harm. Some debts could be paid, some weights could be set down. They tied up Morrison and his men, then began the long ride back to Clearwater. By the time they arrived, the sun was high and the town was buzzing with news. Marshal Price had arrested Silas Blackwood, and Thomas Carter, and the corrupt sheriff, and 3 other men involved in the land fraud scheme. The extent of the conspiracy was still being uncovered, but it was clear that this was the end of Blackwood's reign. Justice finally was being served. That evening, after Henry had been returned safely to the Daltons, after statements had been given and prisoners had been locked up properly, after the adrenaline had faded and exhaustion had set in, James found Emma sitting on the steps of the boarding house. She looked tired, wrung out, beautiful in a way that made his chest ache. He sat beside her without asking permission. "Hell of a day," he said. "Hell of a week." "You're not wrong there." They sat in comfortable silence watching the sun set. The same sun that had been setting when James first saw Emma standing by that fence post. Had it really only been a week? It felt like a lifetime. "What happens now?" Emma asked quietly. "The land is yours, legally and clearly. Thomas's claim will be thrown out. Blackwood won't be able to contest it from prison. You won, Emma. You kept what was yours." "Will's land," she corrected. "Will's dream." "Your dream now." She turned to look at him, and there was something in her eyes he couldn't quite read. "Is it? I'm not sure anymore. I came here for Will, waited here for Will, fought here for Will, but Will's gone. He's been gone for 4 years. So what am I really fighting for now?" James felt his heart start to race. This was the conversation, the one they'd been circling around since that first day, the one Will's letter had set in motion. "I don't know," he said honestly. "What are you fighting for?" "Maybe I'm fighting for the person I discovered I could be, the person who breaks into offices and stands up to corrupt men and rides after kidnappers." She smiled slightly. "The person who's stronger than she thought, braver than she believed, more herself than she's ever been. I like that person." "Do you?" "Very much." Emma reached out, took his hand. Her fingers were warm, solid, real. "Will wanted us to be happy," she said. "Both of us. That's what his letter said. And I think maybe we could be. Happy. Together." James's throat tightened. "Emma, it's too soon. You just lost him. You're grieving. You're not thinking clearly. I've had 5 years to think. 5 years to sit in the dark and wonder what I was waiting for. And you want to know what I realized? I wasn't waiting for Will. Not really. I was waiting for permission. Permission to move forward. Permission to choose something new. Permission to stop being the faithful woman pining for a lost love and start being something else entirely. And now I have that permission. From Will. From you. From myself." She squeezed his hand. "I'm not asking you to marry me tomorrow, James. I'm not even asking you to love me yet. I'm just asking you to stay, to see where this goes, to give us a chance." James thought about all the reasons he should say no, about the guilt he still carried, about the fact that she deserved better than a cowboy with a troubled past and no clear future, about how Will would feel seeing them together. But then he thought about Will's letter, about the blessing given by a dying man who loved them both, about the way Emma looked with fire in her eyes, about how it felt when she smiled at him, when she trusted him, when she stood beside him, ready to fight the world. He thought about what Jake had said that first night, about setting down weights that were too heavy to carry. Maybe it was time. Maybe he'd mourned long enough. Maybe Will was right, and the best way to honor the dead was to live. "All right," James said, the words coming easier than he expected. "I'll stay, for as long as you'll have me." Emma's smile was like the sun breaking through clouds. "Good, because I have plans, big plans, for the land, for the school, for this town, and I need a partner to help me see them through. A partner. A real one this time. Not someone I'm waiting for, someone who's here, present, choosing this just like I'm choosing it." James raised her hand to his lips, kissed her knuckles gently. "I choose this. I choose you. Even though we've only known each other a week. I've known you longer than that, through Will's stories, through his love for you, through every word he spoke about the life he wanted to build." James held her gaze. "And I've known you through this week, through your strength and courage and the way you refused to give up even when any sane person would. I know enough, Emma, enough to want to know more." She leaned her head against his shoulder, and James wrapped his arm around her, holding her close. They sat like that as the stars came out, as the town settled into evening quiet, as the world kept turning, despite everything they'd been through. "Tomorrow," Emma said drowsily, "we need to deal with the land office, get the claim formally transferred, make sure everything's legal." "Tomorrow," James agreed. "Tonight, we just rest." "Tonight," Emma echoed. Then softer, "Thank you, James, for keeping Will's promise, for protecting Henry, for standing with me when no one else would. Thank you for giving me something to fight for besides my own guilt. Is that what I am? Something to fight for?" James thought about that, about how it had felt to charge into that canyon knowing Henry was in danger, about the terror he'd felt when Emma was arrested, about the way his heart raced every time she smiled. "No," he said finally. "You're something to live for. That's different. That's better." Emma tilted her head up and their eyes met in the starlight. For a long moment they simply looked at each other. Then, slowly giving her time to pull away if she wanted, James leaned down. Their lips met, gentle, tentative, a question and an answer both. Emma's hand came up to cup his cheek, and she kissed him back with a certainty that took his breath away. When they parted, both were smiling. "Too soon?" James asked. "Perfect timing," Emma replied. Somewhere in the distance an owl called. A horse nickered. The normal sounds of life continuing. And in that moment, sitting on boarding house steps with Emma warm in his arms, James felt something he hadn't felt in 4 years. Peace. The makeshift courtroom was packed. Every chair in Clearwater's church had been filled by dawn with townspeople standing in the aisles and crowding the doorway. This wasn't just a hearing about land claims anymore. This was about justice, about whether corrupt men could steal from honest families and walk away unpunished, about whether the law meant anything on the frontier, or if it was just another tool for the powerful to use against the weak. James stood at the back watching Emma sit at the front table with Marshall Price and the territorial judge who'd arrived from Cheyenne the night before. Judge Morrison, no relation to Frank, was a stern-looking man in his 60s with iron-gray hair and eyes that had seen every trick in the book. He'd made his reputation cleaning up corruption in mining camps. If anyone could cut through Blackwood's lies, it was him. Silas Blackwood sat across the aisle, flanked by his Denver lawyer. Even in chains, even facing prison, Blackwood maintained his veneer of respectability. Expensive suit pressed crisp, hair perfectly combed, expression calm and confident. He looked like a man who still believed he'd walk out of here a free man. He was wrong. Thomas Carter sat beside him, considerably less composed. The fake brother's hands shook as he shuffled papers, and sweat beaded his forehead despite the cool morning air. Frank Morrison wasn't present. He'd been transferred to a federal prison after his capture, facing charges in multiple territories. The marshal had made it clear Morrison would never see freedom again. The judge banged his gavel, and silence fell like a curtain dropping. "This hearing will come to order. We're here to address multiple matters. First, the question of land ownership regarding the claim filed by William Carter in 1872. Second, charges of fraud, theft, and conspiracy against Silas Blackwood and Thomas Carter. Third, broader questions about land deals conducted in this territory over the past 5 years. Judge Morrison's gaze swept the room. This court is interested in truth, not theater. Anyone who wishes to testify will be heard, but keep your statements factual. No speculation, no gossip. Understood. A murmur of assent rippled through the crowd. Marshal Price, present your case. Price stood a sheaf of documents in hand. What followed was 3 hours of meticulous evidence. The hidden ledgers from Blackwood's office. Testimony from miners who'd worked claims Blackwood had stolen. Bank records showing suspicious transactions. Letters proving Thomas Carter was a known con man with warrants in Colorado, Kansas, and Montana. The case was damning, overwhelming, undeniable. But Blackwood's lawyer was good. Expensive lawyers usually were. Your Honor, my client admits that certain business practices may have appeared irregular. However, in the chaotic world of frontier land claims, some flexibility is necessary. Mr. Blackwood provided valuable services to this community. He helped families liquidate assets they couldn't manage. He brought investment and prosperity to Clearwater. Should he be punished for being successful? He should be punished for being a thief, Emma said clearly from her seat. The judge raised an eyebrow. Miss Hayes, you'll have your turn to speak. Until then, please remain silent. Emma nodded, but James saw the fire in her eyes. She was holding back a storm, and when it was finally unleashed, it would be devastating. The lawyer continued his defense, painting Blackwood as a misunderstood businessman, a victim of jealous rivals and hysterical accusations. It was masterful in its way. James had seen guilty men walk free on weaker arguments. Then the judge called Emma to testify. She stood, smoothed her skirts, and walked to the witness chair with her head held high. James felt his heart swell with pride. This was Emma at her finest. Not waiting anymore, not hoping, acting, fighting, claiming her place in the world. Miss Hayes, the judge said, tell us about your connection to William Carter and the land claim in question. Emma's voice was steady as she explained. The letters from Will, the promise of marriage, the land he'd claimed for their future, her decision to come west when his letters stopped, her arrival in Clearwater 6 months ago, the 5 years of waiting that had finally ended when James told her the truth. William Carter is dead, she said simply. He died in a mining accident in Colorado in March of 1873. I have his final letter written hours before his death expressing his love and his wish that I inherit the land he'd claimed. I have dozens of earlier letters proving our relationship and his intentions. And I have the testimony of the man who was with him when he died, who has no reason to lie and everything to gain by telling the truth. The judge looked at James. Mr. Mitchell, approach. James walked to the front, acutely aware of every eye in the room on him. He'd never been comfortable with attention, preferred to work in the background, let others take the glory. But this moment required him to step forward. For Emma, for Will, for the truth. He took the oath, sat in the witness chair, and told his story. He told them about meeting Will in Colorado, about their partnership, about the mine collapse and Will's death, about the promise he'd made to find Emma and deliver Will's final message, about carrying that letter for 4 years, trying to figure out how to honor a dead man's wish. William Carter and I were legal mining partners, James said, producing the documents he'd kept safe all this time. Under territorial law that gave us shared claim to any land either of us had staked. When Will died, his portion should have transferred to me as his partner. I am here today to formally deed that land to Emma Hayes as Will intended. Blackwood's lawyer jumped up. Your Honor, this is highly irregular. How do we know this supposed partnership was legitimate? How do we know Mr. Mitchell isn't simply another con man trying to steal valuable land? We know, said a voice from the back, because I was there. Old Jake Williams stood hat in his weathered hands. I worked the claims next to Mitchell and Carter in Colorado, watched them for near on a year. They were partners, true and legal, had the papers drawn up proper. And when young Will died, James here paid for the burial out of his own pocket, even though they was supposed to split costs. That's the kind of man James Mitchell is, the kind who honors his debts and keeps his promises even when it costs him. Another voice spoke up, Mrs. Henderson, the mercantile owner's wife. Your Honor, if I may, Mr. Blackwood came to me 3 years ago when my husband was sick, offered to buy our store for half what it was worth, said it was a kindness helping us in our time of need, but it wasn't kindness, it was predation. He was trying to steal our livelihood when we were vulnerable. We refused barely, but I've seen him do it to others who didn't have the strength to fight back. More people stood. More voices joined. The Peterson widow who'd lost her claim to Blackwood. The Martinez family who'd been driven off land they'd worked for a decade. The widow Chang, whose husband had died in a suspicious mining accident right before Blackwood bought their claim for pennies. The stories poured out like water from a burst dam. Years of accumulated grievances. Families destroyed. Lives ruined. All so one man could build an empire on stolen dreams. Blackwood's face had gone from confident to pale to sickly gray. His lawyer tried to object, tried to stop the flood of testimony, but the judge waved him silent. I've heard enough, Judge Morrison said finally. Mr. Blackwood, stand. Blackwood rose on shaking legs. Silas Blackwood, I find you guilty of fraud, theft, conspiracy, and abuse of public office. You have corrupted the very institutions meant to protect people from men like you. You have stolen from widows and orphans. You have used your position to enrich yourself at the expense of those you were supposed to serve. The judge's voice was cold as winter. I sentence you to 10 years hard labor at the territorial prison. All properties and assets acquired through fraudulent means are hereby forfeit and will be returned to their rightful owners. You are a disgrace to the law and to decent society. Take him away. The marshal moved forward, but Blackwood wasn't finished. He lunged suddenly not at the marshal, but at Emma. This is your fault, he screamed, spittle flying. You Eastern bitch. You couldn't just accept your place, had to stir up trouble, had to ruin everything. He reached for her hands, grasping. James was already moving, crossing the distance in 3 long strides. He caught Blackwood's wrist, twisted, sent the man sprawling to the floor. Touch her, James said quietly, his voice carrying through the silent church, and prison will be a mercy compared to what I do to you. Blackwood looked up at him, and for the first time James saw real fear in those calculating eyes. The fear of a man who'd finally pushed too far and found someone willing to push back harder. The marshal hauled Blackwood to his feet and dragged him out. Thomas Carter followed, weeping and babbling about how it wasn't his fault, how Blackwood had made him do it, how he deserved mercy. He received none. The judge turned his attention back to Emma and James. Miss Hayes, Mr. Mitchell, the land claim filed by William Carter is hereby recognized as legitimate. Mr. Mitchell's partnership documents are accepted as legal proof of shared ownership. The transfer of deed to Miss Hayes is approved. The land is yours, Miss Hayes, free and clear of any challenges. Emma's hand found James's, squeezing tight. He squeezed back, feeling the weight of 4 years finally lift from his shoulders. Furthermore, the judge continued, I'm ordering a full investigation into every land transaction Silas Blackwood conducted in this territory. Families who were cheated will have their property restored. Those who cannot be compensated with land will receive monetary damages from Blackwood's seized assets. Justice, while delayed, will be served. The courtroom erupted in cheers. People stood applauding, crying, embracing. James saw Mrs. Henderson hugging the Peterson widow, saw the Martinez family on their knees thanking God, saw Reverend Halloway with tears streaming down his face. He saw Emma, beautiful and strong and victorious, turning to him with joy in her eyes. We won, she whispered. You won, James corrected. I just helped. No, we won, together. She kissed him right there in front of everyone, and James didn't care who saw. Didn't care about propriety or what people might think. He just kissed her back, pouring 4 years of grief and guilt and slowly growing hope into that kiss. When they finally parted, the church was still cheering. The town threw a celebration that night that would be talked about for years. Someone dragged a piano out of the saloon and set it up in the street. Someone else brought out a fiddle. Tables appeared loaded with food, families contributing what they could. Lanterns were strung between buildings, casting warm light over everything. Children ran wild, drunk on excitement and the rare permission to stay up late. Adults danced and laughed and told stories about the day corrupt men finally faced justice. James stood at the edge of it all, watching Emma dance with Henry. The boy's face was alight with happiness, his earlier trauma already beginning to heal. The Daltons had finalized the adoption papers that afternoon, making Henry legally theirs. A family restored, a child saved, another promise kept. "Hell of a thing you did," Jake said, appearing at James's elbow with 2 glasses of whiskey. He handed one to James. 4 years you carried that guilt. 4 years you punished yourself for an accident that wasn't your fault. But you're free now, aren't you? Finally let yourself off the hook. James took a sip of whiskey, letting the burn ground him. "I'm getting there. Still feels strange, like I should be doing something, carrying something, fighting something." "That's because you've spent so long at war, you forgot what peace feels like." Jake gestured at the celebration. "This is peace. This is what you fought for. Try to enjoy it." "I'm trying." "Try harder." Jake grinned. "Besides, you've got a new battle ahead of you. That woman's going to marry you, you know, and marriage is the longest campaign a man ever fights." James felt his ears go hot. "We haven't talked about marriage." "You will. She's already got that look. The look women get when they've decided something and are just waiting for the man to catch up." Jake clapped him on the shoulder. "My advice, don't make her wait too long. She's done enough waiting in her life." Emma caught sight of them and waved Henry over. The 3 of them approached Emma's face, flushed from dancing. Henry chattering excitedly about the new horse Mr. Dalton had promised him. "Mr. Mitchell, Aunt Emma says you know how to teach someone to be a cowboy. Will you teach me? Please." James looked at Emma, saw her encouraging smile, looked back at Henry's eager face. "Tell you what, partner, once you're settled proper with the Daltons, once you've learned all your letters and numbers with Aunt Emma here, then we'll talk about cowboy lessons." "Deal." "Deal." Henry stuck out his hand for a solemn shake. As the boy ran off to tell the Daltons about his future cowboy career, Emma moved closer to James. "Aunt Emma. He started calling me that this afternoon. Hope you don't mind." "Why would I mind?" "Because it implies certain things. About us. About the future." James looked down at her, this woman who'd upended his life in the space of a week, who'd shown him that duty and love weren't opposites, that honoring the dead meant living fully, that second chances existed if you were brave enough to take them. "Emma Hayes," he said quietly, aware of Jake making himself scarce with uncharacteristic tact. "I need to tell you something." "That sounds serious." "It is." James took a breath. "I came to Clearwater to keep a promise, to deliver a message, to set down a weight I'd carried too long. I expected to do that and leave, move on, find the next cattle drive or scouting job or whatever would keep me busy enough not to think. But I met you, and you were nothing like I expected, nothing like Will described. You were stronger, braver, more real than any story could capture. And somewhere between that first day at the fence post and today in that courtroom, I stopped wanting to leave." Emma's eyes had gone bright. "What are you saying, James?" "I'm saying I love you." The words came easier than he'd imagined. Natural. Right. "I love your strength and your stubbornness and the way you refuse to back down even when you probably should. I love that you pick locks and ride horses and stand up to corrupt men. I love that you're kind to children and brave in the face of danger and somehow manage to be dignified even when you're covered in soot from a fire." "James." "I'm not asking for anything," he continued quickly. "I know it's too soon. I know you need time to grieve Will properly. I know I'm just a cowboy with no prospects beyond whatever work I can find. But I wanted you to know, before anything else happens, before life gets complicated again. I love you, Emma, and whatever you need, whatever time you need, I'll wait." Emma was crying now, tears streaming down her face in the lantern light. "You fool! You beautiful, honorable fool! I don't need time. I don't need to grieve Will anymore. I did that years ago sitting by that fence post waiting for a ghost." She grabbed his shirt, pulled him down until their foreheads touched. "I love you too. I think I started loving you the moment you ran into that fire. Or maybe when you promised Henry a home. Or maybe when you stood with me against Blackwood despite barely knowing me. I don't know when it started, but I know how it feels. And it feels right, James. It feels true. Emma." Her name was a prayer, a plea, a promise. "Ask me," she whispered. "Ask me what you want to ask." James pulled back enough to look into her eyes, gray as storm clouds, gray as the Wyoming sky before rain, the most beautiful eyes he'd ever seen. He dropped to one knee right there in the middle of the street, in the middle of the celebration, with half the town watching and music playing and children laughing. "Emma Hayes, I know we've only known each other a week. I know this is fast and probably crazy and completely improper, but I also know that life is short and uncertain, and we don't get unlimited chances at happiness. Will taught me that. His death taught me that. So I'm asking, even though it's too soon, and I have no right, and you deserve better than a drifter with a troubled past." He took her hand. "Will you marry me?" The music had stopped. The whole town was watching now, holding their collective breath. Emma looked down at him, love and joy and certainty shining in her face. "Yes," she said clearly. "Absolutely yes. I'll marry you, James Mitchell, today if you'll have me. Tomorrow if we must. But yes, always, yes." James stood, swept her into his arms and kissed her while the town erupted in cheers. Someone started the music again. Someone else fired a gun into the air in celebration, and everyone pressed forward to offer congratulations. Jake was grinning like a fool. "Told you she'd marry you." "You're insufferable," James said. "I'm right. There's a difference." Reverend Halloway pushed through the crowd. "I can perform the ceremony next Sunday if you'd like. Give you time to prepare properly, make arrangements." Emma and James looked at each other. A whole conversation passed in that glance. Why wait? Why waste another day? They'd both done enough waiting. "Actually," Emma said, "could you do it this Sunday? This coming Sunday? 3 days from now?" The Reverend blinked. "Well, I suppose, if you're certain, it's rather rushed." "We're certain," James said firmly. "Very certain." "Then Sunday it is. I'll make the arrangements." The celebration continued late into the night. James danced with Emma until his feet hurt, accepted congratulations from people he'd never met, drank toasts to love and justice and second chances, and through it all he felt something he hadn't felt in 4 years, joy, pure, uncomplicated joy. Later, walking Emma back to the boarding house under stars that seemed brighter than usual, she said, "We should go to the fence post, tomorrow, before the wedding. There's something I want to do there." "All right. What?" "Say goodbye, properly, to Will, to that part of my life, to the woman who waited there for 5 years." She squeezed his hand. "And say hello to what comes next." They rode out at dawn, just the two of them. The fence post stood where it always had, weathered wood silvered by sun and wind. Emma dismounted, walked to it slowly, placed her hand on the rough surface. James hung back, giving her space for whatever private words she needed to say. "Will," Emma said softly, "I hope wherever you are, you can see this. See us. I hope you know I loved you. That I waited because that love was real, even if it was based on the boy you were before the war rather than the man you became. I hope you know I don't blame you for not coming back, for not being able to heal the wounds that battle left. You did the best you could with what you had." She paused, gathering her thoughts. "James tells me you wanted us to be happy, that you gave him permission, even orders, to love me. I want you to know he resisted, fought it hard, carried guilt like chains because he thought loving me would betray you. But I think you were wiser than either of us gave you credit for. You knew James, knew me, knew we'd be good for each other. And you were right." The morning breeze stirred her hair. James watched her, this strong woman, saying goodbye to her past, and felt his love for her deepen impossibly further. "So I'm letting you go now," Emma continued, "releasing you from promises made when we were both different people. Your free will. Free from my expectations and my dreams and my 5 years of waiting. Rest now. You've earned it." She pressed her forehead against the post for a long moment. Then she straightened, turned to James with clear eyes. "Your turn." James approached one hand on the fence post that had loomed so large in this story. He thought about what to say, how to put 4 years of guilt and grief and slowly earned redemption into words. "Will, brother," his voice came out rough, "I tried to save you. Want you to know that. Tried as hard as I could. And when I couldn't, when you died in my arms, I made a promise. To find Emma. To tell her the truth. To honor your memory. Took me 4 years, but I kept it. Hope that counts for something." He swallowed hard. "I love her, Will. Love her fierce and true, and in a way that surprises me every damn day. And I know you said it was all right. Know you gave permission. But I needed to say it out loud here at this place where she waited so long for you. I love her, and I'll spend the rest of my life trying to be worthy of that, trying to give her the happiness you wanted her to have. That's my promise now, not to you, to her, but I figured you should know." Silence fell, broken only by bird song and wind through grass. James felt Emma's hand slip into his. "Look," she said softly. James followed her gaze. The fence post in the slanting morning light cast a shadow that stretched across the prairie, and tucked into a gap near the top of the post, something glinted. Emma reached up, pulled out a small object. An envelope sealed with wax, protected from the elements by its placement in the wood's hollow. On the front, in Will's handwriting, "To whoever finds this." Probably Emma, knowing her stubbornness. Emma's hands trembled as she broke the seal. Inside was a single page, the handwriting shakier than in previous letters, but still unmistakably Will's. She read aloud, voice cracking with emotion. "To whoever finds this, probably Emma, knowing her stubbornness. If you're reading this, I've either succeeded in healing myself and am with you now, or I've failed and you're standing here alone. Given that you found this letter, I'm guessing the latter. Remember what I told you the day I left for war, that the best thing about the West is second chances. If you're reading this, you probably need that reminder. The land is just dirt, Emma. What matters is who you share it with. Don't waste your life on regret. Don't spend years mourning what might have been. Live, love. Choose happiness over loyalty to a dead man's memory. I'm giving you permission in case you need it. Hell, I'm ordering you. And if you find someone worthy, someone kind, someone who makes you laugh and keeps you safe and loves you like you deserve, don't let him go just because he's not me. Take the second chance. Build the life I couldn't give you. That's what I want for you, Emma. Not faithfulness to a ghost. Not years of waiting. I want you to be happy whatever form that happiness takes." The fence post was always about looking forward, not back. So look forward now. See what's coming instead of what's gone. And know that wherever I am, I'm cheering for you. With all my love for all time, but not for all your life. Move forward, Emma. Choose joy. W. Emma was crying openly now, and James found his own eyes wet. Will had known. Even before he left for Colorado, before he ever met James, before the mine collapse and his death, Will had known he might not make it back, had left this message as insurance, as permission, as blessing. "He always did think ahead," Emma said through tears. "He loved you, wanted you to be happy, even if he couldn't be the one to make you happy. And now I am, happy I mean, with you." She folded the letter carefully, tucked it into her pocket next to Will's first letter that James had carried for 4 years. "Thank you, Will, for loving me enough to let me go, for knowing what I needed before I knew it myself. Rest now. We've got it from here." They stood together in the morning light, facing the future instead of the past, and James knew with a certainty that settled into his bones that this was right, all of it. The pain and the waiting and the long road that had brought them here. It was all necessary, all part of a story that was ending and beginning at the same time. Sunday dawned clear and perfect, the kind of day that made men believe in providence. The church was packed again, but this time with joy instead of judgment. Someone had decorated the simple wooden building with wildflowers and ribbons. Someone else had polished the pews until they gleamed. The piano had been moved back inside, and Mrs. Henderson's daughter practiced scales while people filed in. James stood at the front with Jake beside him as best man, wearing the cleanest shirt he owned and boots he'd actually polished. His hands were steady despite his racing heart. Then the music changed, and Emma appeared in the doorway. She wore a simple dress of cream-colored cotton, practical but beautiful. Her dark hair was loose around her shoulders for once, and she carried a bouquet of prairie flowers. She'd never looked more beautiful, not because of the dress or the flowers or even the radiant smile on her face, but because of the certainty in her eyes, the joy, the absolute lack of doubt about the step she was taking. She walked down the aisle alone, head high, choosing him with every step, and when she reached the front, when she took his hand, James felt his throat close with emotion. "You look beautiful," he whispered. "You clean up pretty well yourself, Cowboy." Reverend Halloway cleared his throat, trying not to smile. "Dearly beloved, we are gathered here today." The ceremony passed in a blur. James heard himself speak the vows, heard Emma speak hers voice clear and strong, heard the Reverend pronounce them husband and wife, and then he was kissing her, and the church was applauding, and they were married. Actually married. Emma Mitchell. It had a good sound. The celebration afterward was at Grace Thompson's boarding house, every room and the yard filled with well-wishers. Food appeared in abundance. More music, more dancing, more toasts to love and happiness, and the couple who'd found each other against all odds. Henry was everywhere, importantly telling people he was the ring-bearer and taking his duties very seriously. The Daltons glowed with pride. Jake told increasingly embellished stories about James's heroics, each version more dramatic than the last. At one point, James found himself standing with Emma on Grace's porch, watching the celebration through the window while catching their breath from another round of dancing. "Happy?" Emma asked. "More than I ever thought possible." "Good, because I have news." She took his hand, placed it on her stomach. "I'm expecting. The baby should come in early spring." James froze. "What? How we haven't even—" He stopped, cheeks burning. Emma laughed. "Not from you, you fool." "Well, not yet anyway. I mean, I'm expecting our future, our children, our life together. I'm saying I can see it all now, James, and it's beautiful." Relief and joy flooded through him. "You're terrible. I thought you meant—" "I know what you thought. Your face was priceless." She kissed him softly. "But someday soon, I hope that conversation will be for real. I want children with you, James Mitchell. Want to fill that house we're going to build with noise and chaos and love." "A house. Right. Guess I should start on that. We'll build it together. On our land, Will's land, our land. A home worthy of the second chance we've been given." They stood together watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and red. In the distance, James could see the fence post standing sentinel over the prairie. Tomorrow they'd ride out there, attach a brass plaque he'd commissioned from the blacksmith, a marker to remember where waiting ended and living began. But tonight was for celebration, for joy, for the beginning of everything. 1 year later. The house stood solid and strong on the Wyoming prairie, 2 rooms completed with a third under construction. Smoke rose from the chimney. Curtains Emma had sewn hung in the windows. A garden grew near the porch, vegetables thriving in the rich soil. And beyond, cattle grazed on land that was legally, finally, irrevocably theirs. James wiped sweat from his forehead, setting down the hammer. The barn was nearly finished. Another week and they'd be able to bring the horses inside for winter. It was good work, honest work, the kind of work that left a man tired but satisfied at the end of each day. Emma appeared in the doorway holding a bundle wrapped in soft blankets. Their son, William James Mitchell, born in April, just as the prairie flowers began to bloom. 3 months old now, with his mother's gray eyes and a temperament that swung between placid contentment and furious indignation with no middle ground. "He's hungry again," Emma said, but she was smiling. "This boy eats like he's training for a cattle drive. Takes after his old man." James set down his tools, crossed to her, peered at his son's face, still amazed that this tiny person existed, that he and Emma had created something so perfect. "Henry's coming this afternoon," Emma continued, "with the Daltons. He wants to show you how well he's riding now." "Good. That boy's going to be a fine cowboy someday." Speaking of which, Jake sent word, "The Rocking D outfit is passing through next week. They want to know if you're interested in signing on again, just for the drive to Montana and back." James considered. Part of him missed the trail, the open sky, the camaraderie of the crew, the simple clarity of moving cattle from point A to point B. But most of him was content, right here, building a home, raising a son, loving a wife who continued to surprise and delight him every day. "Tell Jake I'm retired from trail work. I'm a rancher now. Got responsibilities." Emma's smile widened. "He'll call you soft." "Let him. I've got everything I need right here. Everything. Everything that matters." Later, after Henry had visited and shown off his riding skills, after the Daltons had stayed for dinner and left with promises to return next Sunday after William had been fed and changed and put to bed, James and Emma took their customary evening walk. They ended as they always did, at the fence post. The brass plaque gleamed in the fading light. William Carter claimed this land 1872. Emma Hayes found hope here 1877. James Mitchell found forgiveness here 1878. Together we build our future. James pulled Emma close, her back against his chest, his arms wrapped around her waist. They stood like that often, watching the sunset, talking about their day, making plans for tomorrow. "Do you ever regret it?" Emma asked quietly. "Giving up the trail? Settling down so young, you're only 31. You could have had years more of adventure." "This is adventure." James kissed the top of her head. "Every day with you is an adventure. Every morning I wake up and choose this life all over again. Choose you. Choose our son. Choose this piece of land that Will claimed and we're building into something real. How is that not adventure? When you put it that way. There's no other way to put it. I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be." They stood in silence for a moment. Then Emma said, "I talked to Will today, at his marker. Told him about little William, about the house, about how happy we are. Think he can hear me?" "I think if anyone could hear you from the other side, it's Will. Man always did have excellent timing." Emma laughed. "That he did, bringing us together even after he was gone, making sure we found each other." "Making sure we found ourselves," James corrected. "We were both lost when we met. You waiting for a ghost, me running from guilt. Will's letter didn't just give us permission to love each other, it gave us permission to stop punishing ourselves, to live. And are we living?" James turned her in his arms so he could see her face. The sunset painted her features in gold, and he was struck again by how beautiful she was. Not in a delicate porcelain way, but in the way of things that had been tested and survived, tempered steel wrapped in grace. "We're living more than I ever imagined possible. We're building a home, raising a son, creating something that'll outlast us both. In 50 years, maybe 100, someone will stand on this land and see what we built, and they'll know that love and hard work and second chances can create something lasting." Emma's eyes filled with tears, the good kind. "I love you, James Mitchell, today and every day. I love you too, Emma Mitchell, more than I have words for." They kissed as the sun touched the horizon, painting the world in impossible colors. And when they finally turned back toward the house, toward the life they were building together, the fence post stood behind them. No longer a place of waiting, no longer a monument to broken promises and lost dreams. Now it was something else entirely. A beginning, a reminder, a testament to the truth that sometimes the best destinations are the ones you don't see coming. That sometimes losing what you thought you wanted leads you to what you actually need. that second chances exist for those brave enough to take them. The fence post stood witness to all of it, the waiting and the finding, the grief and the healing, the end of one story and the beginning of another. And it would stand there for decades to come, long after James and Emma were gone, long after their children and grandchildren had grown and built their own lives. A silent guardian watching over land that was claimed in hope, fought for in determination, and held in love. Some promises took years to keep, some debts took lifetimes to pay. But in the end, if you held on long enough, if you fought hard enough, if you believed in something bigger than yourself, justice came. Love won. The broken found healing. And the fence post stood marking the spot where waiting ended and living began exactly as it should. The end.